Hey, Craig.
Hey, Craig.
Hello, Craig.
Hi, Craig.
Hey, Craig.
Hello, and welcome back to the paddock. Today, we're going to be talking about everyone's favorite tattooed Australian, Daniel Ricciardo. And I know you haven't heard my voice in a while, but it's me, LeAnne, and I'm back just in time to be with Hannah, Chelsea, Amy, and Ito while they tell you all about Danny. I really did miss you all, just want to let you know that. And I'm just going to pass it over to Hannah so she can start talking about the driver that got me into F1.
So, Daniel Ricciardo, a Formula One superstar driver and probably number one in our hearts. Let's be honest, it's Daniel Ricciardo. He was born in Perth, Western Australia. And while I couldn't find much on Danny before karting days, he does have memories of motorsports where his father raced at the nearby Barbajalo, sorry if I said that wrong, Raceway in Wanneroo. I apologize if I said that wrong. Known to many as the Honey Badger, given his fuzzy demeanor and feisty driving style. Ricardo grew up as a big fan of NASCAR. Legend Dale Earnhardt adopting the number 3 of his racing number in honor of him. Daniel was always the happiest when he was around cars and go-karts as a young one, and aspired to be a professional driver in some way or avenue at an early age. Once he started karting at the age of 9, there was no turning back. And now on to his start of his career in karting.
He joined the Tiger Kart Club and hopped into various karting competitions. And then by 2005, he decided to try his luck in the Western Australia Formula Ford Championship, driving a 15-year-old Van Diemen, and ended up in 8th place by the end of the season. Towards the season close, though, Ricciardo took a 13-year-old Van Diemen he'd leased over to Sandown Raceway in Melbourne for a shot at the National Formula Ford Series. Unfortunately, his old car didn't quite cut it, and he landed in 16th, 17th, and even had to retire during the weekend's 3 races. After managing a decent 6th place in the 2007 Formula Renault 2.0 Italia, Ricciardo got picked up by the Red Bull Junior team. And in the middle of the 2008 season, Ricciardo decided to give Formula 3 a shot, making his debut at the Nürburgring with SG Formula's Formula 3 Euro Series team. It was a bit of a jump into the unknown for him, but he managed to snag 8th in qualifying for the first race. Surprisingly, he ended up in 6th place during the race itself, thanks to some bad luck from James Jakes and Christian Vietores, who stalled on the grid. However, things took a turn for the worse in the reverse grid race, and he had to settle for 15th place. Next up, in 2009, Ricciardo shifted gears and moved to British Formula 3, teaming up with Carlin Motorsports. He stuck with Carlin for a while and even joined them for the Macau GP. In late October of that year, Ricciardo signed up to be with Tech 1 for the 2010 season, and it was pretty cool because he had already raced with them in Portugal in 2009. His teammate for the season would be Brendan Hartley, who had already raced for the team previously. So that dynamic of rookie and veteran was definitely a good one. However, there were little hiccups because, for example, he missed a second test of the 2010 season due to a minor mountain biking incident. But guess what? Like many drivers before him and since him, he bounced back strong. At the first race of the season in Alcañiz, Spain, he scored pole position for both races and ended up in 3rd and 2nd place, putting him at the top of the championship standings. But Smooth sailing sadly didn't last long. A couple weeks later, at Spa-Francorchamps, he had a rough start and got relegated to the back of the grid for obstructing other drivers' laps. The next two races didn't go too hot either. He finished 13th and 5th, but got bumped to second because other guys broke the Parc Fermé rules. Then Monaco. And Ricciardo was on fire. He grabbed his third pole, and it didn't stop there. He secured his first win at the next race, just ahead of Stefano Goletti. And there were two more victories at the Hungaroring and Hockenheimring. And then Tech 1 boss was super impressed, saying 6 poles in 12 races is good going. Now, Silverstone. It had its ups and downs. And for example, he had a crazy crash with John Lancaster in the first race, but in the second one, he took pole and led the race for a while. But due to brake troubles on the last lap, Esteban Gutierrez passed him. As the season headed into the final round, Ricciardo was super close to the championship leader, Mikhail Aleshin. Just 3 points behind him, really. With his 8th pole of the season, he won the race, setting the fastest lap and tying for the lead with 1 race left. But in the second race, things didn't go his way, and he lost out to Aleshin by just 2 points. In 2011, Ricciardo switched things up, racing for ISR Racing before being called up to HRT.
Now, in June of 2011, Daniel was contracted to be with Hispania Racing, which later became known as HRT by Red Bull Racing. He was set to replace Narine Kathrekian for the remaining races of the 2011 season. The only exception was to be the Indian Grand Prix to allow Kathrekian to race at his home race. Now, Daniel made his Grand Prix debut at the 2011 British Grand Prix at Silverstone. However, on October 22nd of 2011, just a few days before the inaugural Indian Grand Prix, the race where Kathrekian was due to gain back his seat for his home race, HRT F1 announced that Vitantonio Luzzi would be making way for Kathrekian and allowing Danny to race in India, extending his learning curve that Red Bull Racing was paying for because he was part of their junior program and was a test driver for them at the same time. And Red Bull was paying the struggling Spanish team to give Danny that exposure, basically. It also allowed Kathrekian to race in front of his home fans, which I personally kind of wish they'd bring back the Indian Grand Prix. I think it's a really cool race, but that's a personal preference. And then in Abu Dhabi, Danny had to retire due to mechanical issues after starting 20th on the grid. And in the final race at the Brazilian Grand Prix, he only finished 20th after starting 22nd on the grid. So overall, 2011 wasn't a fantastic year for him, but it really and truly was about exposure.
Now, before jumping into Toro Rosso, let's cover his time with the Red Bull Junior team because while I know this is something Ito and Amy mentioned, I'm just going to dive a little more into it. Now, from 2009 to 2011, you could find Danny on the Red Bull Junior team, serving as a test driver and reserve driver for both the Red Bull and Toro Rosso F1 teams. On his last day of testing in 2009, his first year with the teams, he clocked the fastest lap at the Circuito de Jerez by over a second. This placed him as the only driver to go into the 117 bracket. Now, with his impressive skills, he was asked to be a test and reserve driver in partnership with Hartley for the 2010 season, until Hartley was no longer involved with the junior program. So when that happened, this allowed Danny to become the sole driver for the Red Bulls Racing end-of-season Young Drivers Test. And this is at the Yas Marina circuit. And it was like from November 16 to 17, so it's already end of the season. So he did super well there, and in 2011, he was placed as Toro Rosso's reserve driver and took part in the first free practice session of each weekend for the season.
Now, on December 14th of 2011, it was confirmed that Danny would be driving for Scuderia Toro Rosso for 2012 alongside Frenchman Jean-Éric Vergne. At the 2012 Australian Grand Prix on March 18th, Danny managed to overtake his teammate late on the last lap to come in 9th, securing his first 2 world champion points for the year. Now, during wet conditions in Malaysia, he finished 12th after being the first to switch to slick tires. And in Bahrain, he qualified 6th, but dropped back during the race and ended up finishing in 15th. Now, when we got to Monaco, he suffered his only retirement of the season. Yes, you heard that correctly. His only retirement of the season after starting from 15th position. Now, he stayed with Toro Rosso for 2013 and re-signed. In the end, Danny outscored his teammate Jean-Éric Vergne by 7 points and outqualified him for over 3/4 of the season. His impressive qualifying efforts of 30-7 against Vergne over their 2 years together helped promote him to the Toro Rosso senior team, Red Bull, replacing fellow countryman Mark Webber. Danny finished 13th in the championship with 20 points for the 2013 season.
And 2014 was a beautiful year for Red Bull because while we did say bye to Webber, we got to see a duo of Sebastian Vettel and Danny Ricciardo at the Red Bull garages for the season. So I think this was a fun season. His first race of the season was a home race for the youngin, and he was racing at the Australian Grand Prix. Obviously, this is Danny. He was ready to show off his skills that we have been seeing in the past series. And to be honest, the first race could have been beautiful. During the Australian weekend, he had a finished quali and race day in P2, right behind Lewis and his prime Mercedes days. But because of the mandated hourly fuel flow rate limit and exceeding it, they disqualified him. So this would have been the first Australian on the podium ever for the Australian Grand Prix, but they lost it. I mean, of course, Red Bull tried overturning it, but they were denied by the FIA, and the races kept going. He was able to finish in the points at the next race, and he ended Mercedes' back-to-back victories by winning the Canadian Grand Prix. And to be honest, Danny was a little pretty kick-ass guy. You know, he had a lot of drivers really respecting his skills. He was beating out Vettel. He was getting close to, even beating Lewis at some point. And he got into this really cool battle with Alonso that left Alonso saying at the end that Danny was unbelievable and very, very smart, very respectful, which I love. Now, it showed in his scores, really, because he got podiums in Hungary, the US, Belgium, and he was the only non-Mercedes drivers to have won a Grand Prix in 2014. Basically, imagine his skills is what someone would impress us now doing if someone were to beat Max, besides Checo. Now, by the end of the season, Danny was finishing 3rd in the championship and got a new teammate with Daniel Kvyat for 2015. He did receive the Loris World Sports Award for Breakthrough of the Year in April 2015 for the 2014 season. Now, sadly, this didn't really continue on because 2015 was kind of a slow year for Danny, literally. The Renault power engines were behind the Ferrari and Mercedes, and his first top finish didn't happen until Monaco. And we saw him slide just down the championship from last year. He was even behind his teammate Danny to finishing 8th in the Drivers' Championship. He did achieve a couple podiums, though. We have to give him some respect. He was in Hungary and Singapore there. Sadly, though, it just wasn't enough to get him high in the leaderboard.
And now on to the 2016 season. So it seemed Red Bull entered the season with a much more competitive car, and it seemed to show almost immediately. Back-to-back 4th place finishes at the Australia and Bahrain GPs, and was followed by the 2nd fastest time in qualifying at the Chinese GP. Max Verstappen, though, became Ricciardo's new teammate at the Spanish GP following Daniel Kvyat's departure. But let's talk about how the Spanish GP, we saw some questionable strategy calls about pitting, the tires, what was going on in their heads. But then, in Monaco, despite getting pole in quali, a slow pit stop ended his hopes of getting first on race day and ultimately ended up handing the victory to Lewis. Another questionable pit stops. It was a trend that year. Podium finishes did follow in Hungary and Germany, with Danny introducing a new celebration trend, the shoey. Ultimately was a Danny special. This also appeared at the Belgian GP as well, where Danny came in second, and he was joined at the podium by interviewer Mark Webber. Yes, he did a shoey with Danny, which was the first to actually do a shoey with Danny since he started bringing that into his new celebration thing when he got a podium. But Ricciardo's only win of the season came in Malaysia, where he took advantage of Lewis's engine failure to take the checker flag as well. So it was kind of reversed. Lewis took Monaco, Danny took Malaysia. A single victory and 7 podiums allowed Ricciardo to return to his best of the rest standing behind the Mercedes drivers Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton, but ultimately he ended the year third in the Drivers' Championship. So the 2017 season saw Danny record his 5th career victory at the Baku GP, despite getting 10th during quali. Danny was positioned to get 4th place in the Drivers' Championship thanks to a run of 5 straight podium finishes between the Spanish and Austrian GP, along with another 3 between Singapore and Japan. The man was on a roll. This year, there were many who assumed he was a title contender and was known for his consistency to be on the podium. However, retirements at 3 of the final 4 races saw him drop to 5th in the final standings overall. But despite Ferrari being their number 1 contender, I mean, they were literally back to back and neck to neck to Red Bull. I have to admit, Danny did very well about positioning himself to where he was. This is when he started showing hey, I am dominating, I can do this. Now, 2018 was a different season mixed with some emotions. There seemed to be some perceived biasness towards Verstappen within the team, which reared to an ugly head at the Baku GP, where the two collided, and Danny was the one who seemed to take the brunt of the fault for it. After that, things didn't improve at all that much for the rest of the season. Though I have to mention, while the year was a year for Danny, he did take the checkered flag in China and Monaco. I just have to say, at Monaco, we saw him hold off the Ferrari driver Sebastian Vettel, despite having to manage a loss of power throughout the race, redeemed his deserved win since the 2016 misfortune, and got to see the iconic fall into the pool. That lives rent-free in my head. Absolutely obsessed with that moment. In the end, Ricciardo ended up retiring though from 8 Grand Prix and tied for the most DNFs in the 2018 season. He did end up finishing 6th in the Drivers' Championship overall though. In August of 2018, it was announced that Ricciardo would be leaving Red Bull after signing a 2-year contract with Renault, stating he needed something else and he needed a change, a switch up. I will say though, Red Bull severed ties with engine provider Renault that year, not long after Danny left for Renault. Danny, It's always kind of funny to look back at it because you go, Danny, or Red Bull leaves and severs ties with Renault. Danny leaves Red Bull and goes to Renault. Was there some intention there? Always wondered.
And honestly, we'll probably never know. But teaming up with Nico Hülkenberg in 2019, this season, I must say, was off to a bit of a rocky start for Daniel, with retirements in the first 2 races due to front-wing damage in Australia and a power failure in Bahrain. He did manage a 7th place finish in China, but then had an unfortunate collision with Daniil Kvyat in Azerbaijan, leading to both cars getting seriously messed up. Despite these early setbacks, Danny strung together a series of 6 consecutive race finishes, including a standout 4th place in qualifying and a 6th place finish in Canada. However, he faced more challenges with an exhaust failure at the German GP. The turning point came at the Italian GP, where he clinched a well-deserved 4th place, his best result of the season. But there was some rough patches there too, like a first lap crash in Russia that led to his retirement and the later disqualification in Japan. Nevertheless, he finished the season on a high note with 3 consecutive points finishes, including a strong 6th place finish in the United States and Brazil. In the end, it was enough for 9th place in the championship, totaling 54 points, ahead of his teammate Hulkenberg. Moving on to 2020, Ricciardo got a new teammate in Esteban Ocon, and things didn't start off great as he retired from the 2020 Austrian GP due to overheating. In the Styrian Grand Prix at the same track, just a week later, he was on track for 6th place, but ended up 8th. Then came the British GP, where he surprised everyone with a 4th place finish, matching his best result from last year. He had his ups and downs throughout the season, from spinning at the 70th anniversary Grand Prix to 3rd place podium at the Eiffel Grand Prix. He also took the podium at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, finishing 3rd after a very wild race. Ricciardo's final race for Renault at the 2020 Abu Dhabi GP was a good one, honestly. He qualified 12th, but made a great pit stop and even snagged fastest lap on the last lap. Honestly, I love when fastest lap happens on the last lap, because it's just like, I'm going out with a bang. And in the end, he wrapped up the season in 5th place with 119 points, just 6 points behind Sergio Perez in 4th.
So, like several other drivers who ended up switching teams for the 2021 season, Danny switched over to McLaren Racing for the 2021 season. The highlight, though, of Ricciardo's first season with McLaren was in Monza, where he got first in the sprint race and then led the team to a 1-2 podium on race day, and was McLaren's first win since 2012. The win was an emotional one for Ricciardo, though he also did acknowledge that there was still progress to be made by himself and the team. At Monaco, a track where Ricciardo had previously won and was pretty good at, proved to be a challenging weekend though. Well, with Danny failing to progress from the grid position of 12th, the poor result left Danny kind of worrying about the lack of pace. There was a series of ups and downs for Ricciardo in the race that followed, but things seemed to turn a corner after the summer break in August. Although Danny seemed to have had a decent scoring rate, finishing in the top 10 of 13 Grand Prix out of 22, he was outscored by teammate Lando Norris. He openly admitted to struggling to adapt to the new car and was determined to do better going forward. Overall, the Australian finished the 2021 World Championship, Drivers' Championship, in 8th with 115 points, while teammate Norris scored 160 points and secured 6th. Now, 2021 was a rough year. 2022 was a rough year as well. And what he might have not known at the beginning of the season, what this would ultimately be his last year with McLaren. But an overhaul of F1's technical regulations sent to McLaren down the order, and only kind of changing the gap between the team's two drivers, Ricciardo finished only 7 Grand Prix in the points, with a single top 5 finish in Singapore, and only contributed to 23% of McLaren's points overall. Daniel admitted throughout the season he needed to make another step to prove his place with the team in order to improve going forward, and opted to do that during the winter break to make plans to return to Australia, kind of get his mind back. Having not had a chance to visit his family for a long time due to restrictions from the coronavirus pandemic, the trip would involve spending 2 weeks in quarantine after. However, Ricciardo had a dramatic season and underperformed teammate Lando Norris by a considerable margin. That cost McLaren's 4th in the constructor standings at the end of the year, and Danny ended the season in 11th in the driver championship. In August of 2022, McLaren and Ricciardo terminated his contract a year early by mutual agreement. Interesting. Following the quali at the Japanese Grand Prix, Ricciardo announced that he would not be on the grid for the 2023 Formula One season, and he was replaced by Oscar Piastri shortly after the announcement. I will say, while he had a pretty rough racing year, we did get to see a lot of Danny not only having friendship with Lando Norris and getting to see some pretty iconic like YouTube videos out of it. That was pretty spectacular. We also got to see Danny struggle with mental health, which is not something we've gotten to see in previous years. And it was nice and sad at the same time to see someone going through it, because you're able to relate to the driver just even more. And it helps you realize that like they're human. But after that, just a fun note, in 2022, he was named in the Governor General's 2022 Australia Days Honours List. He was appointed a member of the Order of Australia for significant service to motorsports as a competitor and ambassador and to the community. He joins the likes of Mark Webber and Jack Bobham, I'm sorry if I said that wrong, in the Order of Australia system. So that's pretty cool. Despite the year, I mean, I didn't know that until today. So pretty interesting.
After Danny left McLaren at the end of the 2022 season, Daniel elected to return home to Red Bull Racing as a third driver for the current 2023 season. The role basically will see him completing PR activities, assisting in simulator work, along with factory work, and attending race weekends when necessary. He'll also have access to the chat channels and communications to help support the racing team. When Christian Horner was interviewed about Danny's role, he was quoted as saying the following: "He'll be doing some work in the simulator, so he'll be doing all of those activities. And then, of course, with the commercial demands that we have from the myriad of sponsors and partners that we have, particularly with a much bigger presence in the US, where Daniel is now predominantly based, and with 3 Grand Prix next year, he's going to have a busy agenda for the season ahead." And now recently with that third driver role, we've seen Danny drive the Red Bull RB19 in the Pirelli test that was held in July of this year at Silverstone after the British Grand Prix. And then the most recent outing that Danny and Red Bull have had together was actually over this last weekend in Nashville. And they really went all out for it, honestly. If you haven't seen any of the footage from it that's on their social media channels, I highly recommend you check it out. It's basically just Cowboy Rick in your face, and he's currently basically getting to drive around in the RB7, or Kinky Kylie for the Sebastian Vettel fans who remember all of his names for his cars. My personal favorite thing is the fact that they made him a Daniel Ricciardo honky-tonk bar. I'm talking neon sign and everything. And to top it all off, they actually gave him a guitar that was branded with the Daniel Ricciardo honky-tonk and Red Bull on the guitar. And he's doing donuts in downtown Broadway in Nashville, and it's just crazy and so Red Bull and just brought me so much joy. And I think if anybody is a Danny girl or a Danny guy, or if you're a Red Bull fan, it's just fantastic content. And for me, it brought back a lot of joy of why this man made me fall in love with Formula One, and the fact that I get to blame him for the reason that I am a diehard Red Bull girl.
Yeah. And Amy already mentioned that tire test after Silverstone. And let's back it up to that one, because it was then that it pretty much was announced that Danny would be replacing Nick de Vries at AlphaTauri for the remainder of the season. And honestly, to me, that was a very Red Bull move. But if anyone needs a refresher how that went down, what went down at Silverstone, let me give you the Cliff Notes. Danny was doing the tire test. And apparently, after just an hour of the test, Christian Horner called Helmut Marko about the good times he was putting on the board. Marko then called Nick de Vries and released him from AlphaTauri effective immediately due to not having scored any points until now, putting Danny in the vacant seat from the Hungarian GP onwards.
Now, I feel like I have definitely either said this on an episode that we've done or in our PGP group chat, but when this news dropped, this was truly not something that I had on my Formula One bingo card at all. Yes, it is a very Red Bull move, but it's not a move that I really saw coming. But I'm also not going to complain about getting Danny back on the grid. And it really was not something I think any of us had on our Formula One bingo cards for the year.
Definitely not. I did not see it coming with Danny joining AlphaTauri in any form of fashion for the 2023 season. But it was everything I needed and more without realizing it. I wanted it so bad to see him on the grid again, but the man can drive when given a car. It has shown and shown again. And now that we've talked about Danny as a whole in his racing career, let's talk about life outside of Formula One. His life in Perth, Australia. This man is pretty amazing. I see him often enjoying it by spending time with friends. He is often seen doing other fun, adventurous things like motocross, hiking, biking, etc. Adrenaline on the edge. This man is full of a lot of love and joy. DR3 wines. I love DR3 wines. I just tell you that if you order a bottle, enjoy and maybe put it on the shelf as just something to show. Enchante, his merch line. Who doesn't love it?
I think we can all agree that PGP kind of single-handedly keeps Enchante going. I, for one, have so much Danny Ric merch. Even from before it was Enchante, when it was DR3. I sometimes question if I have too much, but is there really such a thing as too much Danny Ric merch? I personally don't think so, but I think my parents might disagree with that statement. But if you haven't checked out his merch, go do it. It's a 10 out of 10 for me, at least.
Just real quick, I have to say the quality of his clothes is absolutely amazing. For what it's worth cost-wise, you get very, very good quality shirts, hoodies, sweaters, etc. And now that we've talked about his life in a whole, let's go ahead and move into probably my favorite part of our episode, the pre-outro. And this one is going to be a driver quote. The one that I wanted to talk about was "Enjoy the Butterflies" quote by him. It is my absolute favorite. I'm not going to say the whole quote. I'm just going to say a few sentences, and I would tell you to please give it a listen if you like it. So, enjoy the butterflies. Enjoy being naive. Enjoy the nerves, the pressure. If you kind of want to stand on the top from day one, then there's nothing else to look forward to. It has gotten me through so much. I absolutely love that quote.
Wasn't this just the most perfect episode to have before COTA? It feels right to have this, I would say, honorary Texan get his spotlight before Austin. What hilarious antics do you think Danny will get into this weekend? Let us know on our socials. Everywhere we are at Paddock Girls Podcast, except Twitter. There you can find us at Paddock Girls Pod. Speaking of COTA, you may get to see a lot of PGP there this weekend. We cannot wait to get there. And as you're listening to this, some of us could even be on our flights heading there. We're definitely going to be all around town and cannot wait to meet any listeners there as well. Thanks for joining us in the paddock. We're the Paddock Girls, and we will see you in COTA.
Bye, Craig.
Bye, Craig.
Bye, Craig.
Bye, Craig.
Bye, Craig. See you in COTA.